This FedGov Today program is sponsored by Leidos. On this edition of FedGov Today with Francis Rose, the handoff is ready for the president's management agenda. The future of cyber warfighting has three main parts and turbocharging innovation at DoD. Welcome to FedGov Today with Francis Rose. The final update to the president's management agenda for the Biden administration includes a long list of tasks the Office of Management and Budget will drive through the last day of the administration. OMB leaders cite progress in all three areas of the PMA. Jason Miller is Deputy Director for Management at OMB. Jason, welcome. It's great to have you on the program. Which area of the three, we'll talk about all three of them in turn, but which area do you think you made the most progress in the PMA?
Francis, first, thank you for having me. First, it was really important that we had three areas of the PMA. To get stuff done, you need to keep things simple, especially in a large enterprise like the federal government. Where I think we've made the most progress is on what we called Priority 2, service delivery and customer experience. And the American people have noticed. Over the last 4 years, we've had the largest gain in customer satisfaction with federal government services ever. We dramatically improved wait times at SSA. We fixed the issues with passports, and now if you're renewing, you can apply online for your renewal from home in minutes. We created direct file at the IRS, an ability for millions of Americans to file their taxes directly with the government for free. Veterans can manage their prescriptions with an easy app on their phone. So there's countless ways that we've improved services, but more than that, we've built the capacity, the teams, the measurement inside of federal agencies. So I don't think these are just one-off wins. I think we have a trajectory of improvement and a culture inside these major service providers, because the government's a big service provider, whether that's something like a passport or helping people when they're dealing with an emergency or they've lost a job. We have the capacity to drive continued improvement going forward now.
It's interesting that you go to culture right away, because one of the conversations we have on this television show all the time is about changing culture in organizations. What do you think you've done? What do you think your teams have done across the administration and across the agencies to drive that culture change that you just referred to, Jason?
Culture is critical. It's critical for successful teams, so you're pushing on the right thing. The first priority in our PMA was about the workforce, because the success of any organization rests in its people, its teams, whether that's a public sector organization, federal entity, or private sector organization. We've made a major focus there. We actually have the highest employee engagement score ever amongst the federal workforce, and employee engagement correlates to performance. One of the ways that we really thought about driving change is the idea that success begets success. So demonstrating some wins. Demonstrating wins, putting points on the board and rewarding people for that success creates benefits going forward. It means people want to build on that. It means people want to try new things because they're going to get rewarded for it.
You referenced first pillar of the PMA is workforce, second is customer experience, third is managing the business of government. What's different about the way the federal government manages its business today than in 2021 when you came into office, Jason?
So the phrase I always use is the federal enterprise. Everyone uses agency X and agency Y. We have lots of different agencies that do incredibly different things, but the government has to think about itself as a single enterprise, whether that's on the workforce side, the service delivery side, or the dollars that go out the door, either through the things we buy, the goods and services we buy as a government, or through the dollars that we give out through financial assistance to carry out the mission of government. We give money to states and localities and nonprofit organizations and universities, and we have to manage as an enterprise, and it's been a major focus on the contracting side. We've saved over $60 billion by strengthening the way we operate as an enterprise, a thing we call category management, and we've accelerated that. We've set high expectations for agencies, and we've driven the results of that. On the federal financial assistance, for the first time, we rewrote the rules from the ground up so that the entities that are receiving dollars, more of those dollars are going to outcomes instead of overhead, and the community inside of the federal government, for the first time, is seeing itself as a federal financial assistance community, just like our IT community, leverages one another. Our CFOs leverage one another. Our acquisition folks leverage one another. The federal financial assistance community is key to driving progress going forward.
I've been covering this space for 20 years, Jason, and leaders from administrations of both parties, every administration since 2006 forward, that I've talked to, has talked about thinking about the government like an enterprise. What do you think that you've done differently, you and your team have done differently, to maybe institutionalize that concept so that people will do it more and talk about it less?
Yeah. Expectation setting with leaders, particularly career leaders who continue on and drive the work from administration to administration. Data in two different ways. One, on service delivery. You can now go online and see the performance of our major service providers. They're collecting and required to collect feedback from their customers, and making your performance outcomes public. That's transparency for the public that are leading those services, but it's also a mechanism for accountability. And then you have to have the structures in place to actually enable the government to work like an enterprise. That could be enterprise data, but it's also the connective tissue between the different teams. And OMB, where I am, plays a key role in that. We're the corporate center of the federal enterprise.
What has that meant for your relationships with organizations like GSA and the Office of Personnel Management, where the major acquisition and major workforce data come from and go to?
Yeah, I mean, it's been critical since day one that our team, the teams at OPM and GSA, have been operating as one. I have incredibly close relationships with the leadership teams there. I'm talking to them constantly. And we built this management agenda together, not just GSA, OPM, and OMB, but we built it with the President's Management Council. We didn't want this to be a dictate that says this is what we're doing. We wanted to say we as a team, the leaders across the major agencies, are committing to a shared agenda so that we can drive and embed progress in our agencies in the federal enterprise.
You did something interesting when you rolled out the PMA and some of the goals within it. You put names and faces on performance.gov of the people that were responsible for this. What do you think that did as far as driving the success that you've had?
It's with all incentives, it's a combination of carrot and stick, right? It's a carrot in that somebody knows that they are the owner of this. They are proud of the work that's going to be done. People across the government are looking to them for progress. It's a stick. It is known that they are the people that are leading the work, and making clear that we have individuals who are accountable, and then we translated that back into accountable actions that individual agencies had to take within each of those specific areas so that we can make some progress.
The fact sheet that your administration put out about this last week says, as this PMA chapter concludes, the next iteration of the PMA presents an opportunity to build on these successes, tackle persistent and emerging challenges, and leverage new technology to create a government that's even more responsive and resilient. What are you telling the landing team for the Trump administration that you would like to see them do, or that you would advise that they do, to continue on the successes that you've had, perpetuate that idea that you lay out there?
So I think it's important that we step back to January 2021 when this administration took office. We're in the height of hopefully once in a lifetime pandemic, an economy that had a lot of uncertainty to it, and people, families, communities, small businesses, schools, localities were all facing enormous challenges. That's a moment where Americans need their government to work. It was clear Americans need their government to work. And we had resilient teams and resilient agencies that moved mountains to make sure that we were getting vaccinations out to people at historic levels, testing for COVID, economic relief for small businesses, and venues that rely on individuals coming in at a time that wasn't happening in early 2021. But one of the things that we learned was the challenges with the underlying capacity. We had resilient people and teams, but they didn't always have the support they needed from their systems and their technology. We've made major investments in those places. We have put things at a place where they are ready to continue their improvement trajectory. And what I would say going forward, and why we said that in our fact sheet, is I think we're handing the ball off in a place that is stronger than it's ever been. I think the potential for continuing the federal enterprise approach across the board is in the strongest place it's ever been. We have employee engagement score at the highest it's ever been. We have the highest gain in customer satisfaction. So building on that investing, leveraging some new technologies, continuing to bring early career and technical talent into our agencies, I think we are positioned, and the next team has to determine the priorities and outcomes for them, but we've positioned all of those pieces in a place for continued improvement.
Jason, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
You can read more about the PMA on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, the future of cyber warfighting has three main parts. You'll learn about them next when FedGov Today with Francis Rose continues in a moment.
If something were to happen in the Pacific, could we respond, could we strike in kind across all domains with all of our services in tangent with the full power of the US military? And I think most people are going to pause before they answer that question. And to me, that's where IT superiority comes back in. Because if you don't know the answer to that question, then you probably don't have the information you need to understand all the power you have at hand and how it works together. So a big piece of superiority and deterrence is visibility, consolidation. You know, my biggest piece of advice to the military would be to leverage the power that they have.
Welcome back. The new Assistant Secretary of Defense for Cyber Policy says he'll use a return on investment metric for cyber success at DoD. Michael Solmeyer's been on the job in that role since August. Tim Krippendorf is Business Development Lead for Cyber and Computer Network Operations for Leidos. Tim, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. You wrote recently, the future of cyber warfighting is about being big, fast, and everywhere. What does that mean in the context of the work that's going on inside DoD?
Thanks, it's great to be here. So big, fast, and everywhere is really about how the United States, its allies, and really adversaries that participate in this warfare area are seeking to scale their operations, to speed their operations, and then to connect their operations across multi-domain reach with cyber capabilities and cyber effects. And I think, you know, for the future of cyber warfare, that really means three things. The first thing is the need for enhanced cyber intelligence. The second thing is all about innovative offensive cyber capabilities. And last, but certainly not least, is the need for advanced defensive capabilities. So a place like Leidos is really focused on providing smarter solutions across those three areas to enable defense of the nation, to hold adversaries at risk, and provide options to decision makers.
How much can one even talk about what innovative offensive cyber capabilities are in the context of what we're dealing with threats from China and Russia and others?
Well, I'd start by saying it all starts with intelligence, right? So we have advanced persistent threats that the United States and its allies face. And those are threats that can remain very unobserved, undetected, potentially for long periods of time in a network. And so the key to getting after that, to gaining insight, is really an insight into things like supply chains, an insight into things like component vulnerabilities, and multi-domain combat systems. Now, with that information, right, you need to involve trusted mission AI, and that's going to enable you to accelerate and expand that cycle that starts with intelligence, then leads to development, and then eventually operations. So one of the things that we're focused on is pulling apart, right, physical systems, software systems to detect those component vulnerabilities and rapidly prototyping, developing, and releasing actionable solutions against those things.
Are there common themes among the vulnerabilities that you're seeing now, and how do you recommend to your customers and others that you talk to about how to seek out and how to mitigate those vulnerabilities?
Well, again, a lot depends on the intelligence that you're getting against that. And so let me pause for a moment on the defense and return to your question about what can we talk about on offense. As we look to the future of offensive cyber capabilities, these will remain relevant for global conflicts at the high end and low end of intensity for years to come. And a few aspects about that offensive cyber that we think are going to remain prominent are, number one, the reusability, the adaptability of exploits that are developed. If you can reuse and adapt exploits from adversaries or ones that you develop on your own, then you introduce a lot of operational flexibility on your own end. Now, the second part of the offensive capabilities that we see in the future is enhanced delivery mechanisms. So what this really means is expanding the reach of cyber beyond simply an on-net platform and moving more into this realm of cyber electromagnetic. So what's really important is to constantly research and development, not only cyber, but automated processes, advanced processes, to include signal development, software development, to remain ahead of the weapons and ahead of those advanced delivery mechanisms.
We have about 30 seconds left. What are the ways that you see gains able to be made the most quickly in your view right now?
Well, I think defense is last but not least, must focus on defense. And so that includes not only physical weapon systems and operational technology, but command and control platforms. That's something we can do something about today, infusing with mission-trusted AI to scale across that larger attack platform.
Tim, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You can read more about cyber at DoD on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, turbocharging innovation at DoD. FedGov Today with Francis Rose continues in a moment.
Those indicators that are keys of mission success, right? I mean, every mission has different objectives. Some of them are short-term, some of them are long-term missions. And it's really about evolving that so you're delivering for your stakeholders at large. And, you know, software is such a big part of what we do every piece of our lives today. And delivering quality software is important at speed and scale.
Welcome back. The outgoing and incoming acquisition leaders at the Defense Department have an opportunity for a breakthrough in weapons systems capabilities. The Government Accountability Office believes it starts with a pilot program. Shelby Oakley is Director of Contract and National Security Acquisitions at the Government Accountability Office. Shelby, welcome. Thanks for coming on the program. You wrote recently about this, that you recommend that the Army, Navy, and Air Force designate one or more new cyber physical capabilities as pilot programs. What would you like to see come out of those programs, and how would conducting them help the departments understand acquisition innovation better?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Francis. I appreciate being back. The pilot programs are just one way in which the department can show other programs how to do things differently. And I think that's the kind of point that we want to make in the report that we issued is things need to change. Everybody agrees. Every strategy document that you read, from the National Defense Strategy down to the CNO implementation plan, navigation plan, talks about need for speed of capability and need for innovation, right? So we go out and we talk to these programs and they're like, doesn't apply to me. These practices that we see leading companies who are innovative, who are speed focused, those practices that they take, they don't think they apply to them. And so we think with something like a pilot program, it can provide the lessons learned as to how this could work in the federal government context to drive those changes that we need. Now, is it the panacea? Is it the be-all, end-all? No, of course not. There's bigger things that need to change to make, real dramatic changes within the Department of Defense. But it's something that could provide incremental change at this point.
It's interesting that you're talking, what I hear you say, maybe I'm reading between the lines too much, but you're saying something similar to what Jason Miller said earlier in this program about culture and the way that organizations think about how they can or should do something rather than what the FAR says or DFAR says or any of that kind of thing. Am I on the right track?
You are exactly on the right track. The Department of Defense has a lot of flexibility within its existing systems to do things differently. The culture just isn't there. So if you think about all the reforms that Congress has provided the Department of Defense over the past, forever, it's enabled them to be able to do things differently. But what we're seeing in the work that we do is that you know, they're beginning the same types of programs that they've always begun that haven't resulted in the outcomes that we would expect in terms of that speed and innovation and getting those capabilities to the warfighter more quickly. And so we really think that you know, something needs to change in terms of the culture and driving that change within these organizations to be able to get those things. One of the perfect examples is with all these flexibilities, you know, the most recent ones that started in like 2018, those programs that started under those new approaches that DoD has been working on, they're taking just as long as the historic programs, on average 11 years to deliver capability to warfighter. And that's just not quick enough for the types of challenges that we're facing in the U.S. today.
To the point that you're making, headlines from, or titles of two pieces of work that you released recently. Navy ship modernization, poor cruiser outcomes demonstrate need for better planning and quality oversight of future efforts. Coast Guard acquisitions, further cost and affordability analysis of polar fleet is needed. What are the common elements here among what you've talked about defense acquisition, those two things, other areas that you're working? I mean, it seems like this is, we can look at those two individual pieces of work, but we could change the names out for different programs and the same concepts would still apply.
Yeah, I think fundamentally what we see in the organizations that we review, like DoD and the Coast Guard, is we pick a platform or we pick a capability and we just go for it. And I think that that lacks sophistication in terms of being able to understand what is it that we actually need to meet the threats that we're trying to face. And so in the case of the Coast Guard, for example, how are we going to be able to afford this icebreaker fleet? What is it that we're trying to do? And how do we afford it in the context of all the other programs that we have that are also challenged from a cost and schedule perspective? From the cruiser perspective, talking about that program, the Navy has been for years trying to build up its fleet to meet the near-peer threat that we have from China. And when you think about the numbers there, we haven't made any progress. And so when you're thinking about modernizing existing ships, the need for getting those things right is super important, especially because all of our new shipbuilding programs, I'm sure you've reported on it, are over budget and behind schedule and are not going to be entering the fleet when we thought they should be to help us meet that threat. And so learning the lessons from something like the cruiser modernization program and applying them to these big modernizations that we have coming up, like on the destroyers, is going to be key for DoD to be able to continue to maintain its fleet size, not grow, maintain its fleet size. And so I think one of the things that is going to be important as the new administration comes in, as the new Congress comes in, is to think about looking at what have we experienced already? What do we know about what has gone wrong or what needs to change? And how can we take actions and steps in the next coming years to make those changes within these organizations so we actually see different results?
So you just keyed on something there too that I wanted to go to next, and that is a new president, new leadership in the Department of Defense and Department of Homeland Security in the case of the Coast Guard, and new Congress, new leadership on the committees of jurisdiction and so on. What do you advise, maybe not even like you would advise in a recommendation in a report, but more broadly, to make sure that things like this don't slip through the cracks in the process of an administration and a Congress that are focusing potentially on new priorities or new programs?
Yeah, I would say look to what everybody says, because similar to what you talked with Jason about, you know, all the strategies, all the documents say the same thing. I think it's well known what some of the challenges are within these organizations in driving speed and innovation and driving positive outcomes. You know, there's issues with the budget process, there's issues with the requirement process, there's issues with culture and workforce. There's issues with leadership support of risk and risk taking and understanding that, you know, to do something different, it might require a little bit riskier of approach than you have in the past. And so I'd encourage those folks to take a look kind of at what everybody's already saying needs to happen and think about what are the specific approaches that they see are needed to drive that change.
You've spent a lot of time, I know, recently with private sector organizations learning their leading practices and so on. What's the biggest difference that you see conceptually or tactically between what those organizations are doing and what you see inside the federal government?
Yeah, absolutely. The biggest difference is they set up programs for innovation. And what I mean by that is they set their programs up in such a way that they know they're going to get whatever they can get out there first. But that's not the end. That's just the beginning of them continuing to iterate and innovate on the product that they have put out there. And that drives a whole different culture about S&T and R&D leading into those acquisition cycles. And so those folks do a really good job of understanding what they can do in the short term to be able to meet needs, having the longer term vision, and then also understanding what is it that the customer wants. And I think that that's the biggest distinction that we see is that there's not really a great approach within the Department of Defense or even the Coast Guard of saying, what do our soldiers, what do our sailors need? What is the most important thing to them to be able to address these threats that they're facing, and how can we get to them more quickly? And I think that's one of the biggest things that need to change.
Shelby, it's great to have you back on the program. Thanks very much for joining me today.
Appreciate
I appreciate it. You can read more about acquisition reform at the Pentagon on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. FedGov Today continues in just a moment.
One of the things as a cyber guy from the Department of Defense, one of the things that amazes me is the threats to national security today, I think, aren't just state actors. I mean, you're seeing the emergence of people with a cause, and they jump on one side or another on an issue, and that becomes a national security threat that then gets higher than, you know, the script kiddies that we used to talk about all the time of, you know, teenagers in people's basements. Mm-hmm. Well, the sophistication level is much higher today with all of these activists, hacktivists they call them, that are emerging and really creating challenges that are not in a war plan, so to speak.
Welcome back in today's event spotlight. West 2025 is just a couple of weeks away. January 28th through 30th at the San Diego Convention Center. FCA International and U.S. Naval Institute are the co-hosts. You'll meet military, industry, and academic leaders to explore cutting-edge strategies and technologies shaping maritime security. You can read more and register at fedgovtoday.com/events. FedGov Today TV returns next Sunday morning at 10:30. I'm Francis Rose. I'll see you then. Thanks for watching and have a great week. If you want insights from agency and industry leaders on the latest topics in technology, management, workforce, defense, and acquisition, sign up for the FedGov Today podcast with me, Francis Rose. I release new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday, so you'll stay up to date on the issues that matter most to federal government leaders. Listen at fedgovtoday.com and everywhere you get your shows. Don't miss out on the conversation. Follow the podcast today.